Hello and welcome to Field.work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andy Buist and I work at Havas Helia. And my role this morning is to introduce you to the day and take you through the keynotes. A little bit of background to Field.work. Like most of the great ideas in our industry, it was born from a few glasses of wine one evening a few months ago. The inspiration came not just from the wine, but from a day that we'd spent at an event. And the event was good, it was interesting, we learned, but it wasn't a huge amount of fun, it wasn't very interactive, it wasn't entertaining. And we came up with the idea of a festival of data, and this is the first festival of data we've hosted, and hopefully the first festival of data the world has seen. And we wanted this to continue over time. And the reason it's a festival rather than just a conference is we want it to be fun and interactive. So in here we have keynotes throughout the day. You're about to hear the first of 4. Next door we have an interactive workspace with lots of exhibitions, and we have 2 workshop spaces running 13 workshops throughout the day. Everything from the power of language to how to make great decisions using data. Starting off this morning we'll have Capgemini, who you're about to meet. They will be talking about the infinite individual. Steve Jones is the Global VP of Big Data at Capgemini. He's a snowboarder, surfer, and windsurfer who has worked in over 15 different countries on 4 different continents. A regular contributor to the Financial Times, business and technical journals, he's the author of Enterprise SOA Adoption Strategies and has been constantly on the leading edge of new technology trends. Moving into Java in 1998, cloud computing in 2006 with Google and Amazon, and most recently creating the first end-to-end reference architecture for big and fast data, the Business Data Lake, which has been adopted by multiple Silicon Valley and other tech companies, including Pivotal, EMC, and Informatica. A regular presenter at conferences, including in front of over 20,000 attendees as part of the keynote at the Java One Developer Conference in 2006. So a slightly smaller audience today, Steve, but hopefully it'll be okay. And he will be joined by Nigel Walsh, who's the VP and head of UK Insurance. He joined Capgemini in 2010, having previously worked for a variety of US-based startups, working specifically into the financial services sector. He's over 15 years' experience in leadership, bringing emerging technologies to market in EMEA, and sits on Capgemini's UK Digital Board. He's also the exec sponsor for the UK Community Programme, working with charities including the Prince's Trust, Children in Need, and Nani Kelly. They will be talking about the infinite individual. They will be talking for around 30 minutes. We'll then have a Q&A, which I will manage, and then we'll hand over to the panel discussion. So please join me in welcoming Steve and Nigel to the stage.
So morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Nigel Walsh. I'm the insurance guy, and Steve Jones, the data guy. So I'm looking around the room, I'm guessing most people are saying we're at a data conference going, what on earth have they brought an insurance guy to this thing? So, quick show of hands. Who in the room's got their insurance policy? Excellent. So that's all of us. Who in the room has made an insurance claim or had to interact with their insurance company over the last X number of years? Good, we've got lots of disgruntled customers. Since 1648, when Edward Lloyd, the founder of the London market in essence, started insurance back in Lombard Street, just down the road, we have done nothing but produce data. We are manufacturers of nothing. And it is one of the most exciting times right now in insurance for us, with the just huge volumes of data that we've got. And I don't want to be controversial, maybe I do. We have an opportunity at this very moment in time to either disrupt and lead an industry or completely and utterly die. We have a phenomenal challenge ahead of us because, like many other industries out there, we don't understand what we're doing with the data that we've got, and we probably have more about it than you could ever imagine. So throughout this session, Steve and I will share lots about the data lake and what we're up to, and I'll pepper some examples from the insurance world and how that actually interacts with our everyday life. So,
do you want to log me the kicker? Is this? It is on. Excellent. So, things about this, we'll start with the idea of the infinite individual, the information that's available to everybody. And using a lake as a metaphor in terms of think of all this information pouring and streaming in and it getting bigger. And so let's start with the old school. And what's the old school data? Well, your transactions, your web counters, your social media. Yep, social media is already old school. In terms of volumes of data, you're talking about actually quite a small amount. I know people talk about big data and say social media, but we'll go through this and say, actually, social media, that's small data now. In terms of what the challenge is and what the opportunity is and where the market's really going towards, having transactional data, having social media, sure, it tells you how people begin to think. You get a knowledge of their likes, Businesses like Amazon, in terms of, as Nigel was saying earlier, you don't open the Amazon emails anymore because you buy something every time. Because the first three things, you know what, actually, yeah, I did want that. That's another 20 quid gone. So I'm not going to open my Amazon emails because that's 20 quid every single time I open an email because I go, yep, there we go, click. And in terms of if you think about it, there's an organization in Amazon where they're not a marketing company. They're not. They're a data-driven technology company. A company that has all of that analytics and knows exactly what you're going to buy next, knows exactly what you've been looking at. So all of the pieces when we talk about data and analytics, the phrase of, a segment of one, just think about the fact that there's a company who has completely disrupted retail, completely disrupted marketing in retail, and I've worked with them on and off over the years, and they don't have a particularly phenomenal marketing department. They have some phenomenal mathematicians. They have some phenomenal engineers. As Mark Andreessen has said, the guy originally founded Netscape and Andreessen Horowitz, the big VC firm, software is eating the world. So we start today with the old school, with the data you've got, the transactions you've got, the social media you've got, and you're beginning to understand how somebody thinks. But if we go to the next stage and we say, well, we've got mobile phones, we've got the connected car, we've got location information, we start getting more and more data. You can genuinely track people. Example, if anybody's got an app here that's got an airline piece on, you might have noticed that the airline app is saying, do you mind if I track the information in background when this app isn't even being used? And most people go, yeah, sure, why not? That airline now knows when you don't fly with them. So when you check in on the app and you check in, they know you're flying with them. But now they also know when you're not flying with you. They know when you've got the Eurostar to Paris rather than flying to Paris. They know when you got the train to York. They know when you went to Barcelona on holiday but didn't fly with them. They know all of that information about you, and you've given it to them. And the connected car, all of that information, if anybody's ever got in a Tesla, they're magical, magical things. Oh, they're lovely. But a huge amount of information. That will genuinely understand what you're doing in your driving habits. You get into a Tesla if you're using it regularly. You get into the car, and there's traffic on your way home. It will know you're about to drive home, and it will give you a different route. It knows all of that about you because of data.
You go a step further, right? So connected car is one of my favorite topics right now because it starts to show how exciting and how cool insurance really can be, because the insurers are there going, I know where you drive, I know how you drive, because the pay-as-you-drive stuff, it's dull, it's boring, it's a blunt instrument. You might as well go on to an aggregator and say, I'm going to do 3,000 miles a year. Whoopie-doo. What you want to do, and there's companies out there today that will compare your driving style, because you can drive fast and safe. It may not be legal, but you can drive fast and safe, therefore you're a lower risk for the insurer, but you compare your driving style to that of an Institute of Advanced Motorists. So we now start to get behaviors in driving. Interesting. More interesting is telematics, this connected car thing, has been around forever. I mean, genuinely, the first GPS and telematics things, 25 years old. All that's changed is the business model. Everyone talks about black boxes in cars. They'll be standard over the next few years in cars in Europe. They already are in the US. This is a telematics device. We now know exactly where you are. I can biometrically say, actually, it's Nigel at the wheel, because as soon as my hands go on the steering wheel, yes, that's the guy driving. I'm not sitting in the passenger seat and letting my mate drive. So it's all possible technologically. It's a really, really great opportunity, but it's also it's a huge fear factor for us. If that's my insurance company and my metric, why do I need an insurer? I am losing touch with my customer unless I start to understand my data and become relevant. Move a step further, I'm one of the guys that lives in towns. I sold my car 2 years ago. I'm your worst customer as an insurance company. I'll use Zipcar, I'll use Streetcar. There's companies out there that can disrupt our business model if they understand data better. And Zipcar don't sell you an insurance policy, they sell you a journey. They sell you a journey. We've all gone onto price comparison sites and done, how much is my insurance for the year? Here's my 12,000 miles, and honestly, it's parked in the garage. Honestly, it's parked in the garage, right? We haven't got a garage, but honestly, it's there. Soon, you'll be taking your data out of these things and going, aggregate my journey from London to Manchester today. Give me the top 5 providers that can provide that journey the cheapest way, and if I go a different direction because of the connected cars telling me to go via a BP station or a Shell station, I get lower fuel, I get free coffee and whatever else. It has a massive opportunity for us.
And I think in terms of the data is when you think about tweets and social media, about the volume pieces, is pouring into this lake. You tweet, and a person does it. But what we're talking about here is implicit data. Every single piece that that phone tracks, every single time that car moves, every millisecond, you can get a piece of information about how you're driving, what you're doing, and where you are. So it's not a person hitting the tweet button. It's a continual stream of information. Next up, let's think about data sources we've got today that aren't really data. Video. Most in the UK, we have more CCTV per capita than pretty much anyone on planet Earth. Edward Snowden coming out and saying, oh, you're being watched. Really? That man has never walked around London. But we don't use it as data. There's still a person sitting there, right, who looks through those cameras and is basically just using his remote eyes. Well, analytics is coming to do facial recognition. A little bit creepy, a little bit spooky. But I can start seeing how people walk around a store, how they walk around a mall. When do they go and get stuff off a shelf and then put it back somewhere else? What caused them to do that? Not just what was the basket at checkout, but how was that basket constructed? What is the order in which that basket was constructed? How did they move from shop to shop? What was that person as they moved through that journey? Then I can suddenly understand the fact, how are you actually interacting with me? I think you're walking around like this. Turns out nobody's walking around like that. So understanding the fact that actually, because of the way you've laid things out, you're actually tracking individuals, turning that video pieces into data. And the volume there is absolutely massive. To track all of those individual journeys further and further so you're knowing how they're working. Good example in terms of our mobile devices linked to that as well. If NFO mobile, things like iBeacons. You can link the video to the people to understand the mood, to understand, I think the next one, in terms of how they're talking, the stress in their voices, all this call center data we have today. There's companies today who are doing this, but how do I link the fact that somebody phoned up with my insurance claim and finished the call, let's say, not terribly happy? What does that mean? Do I then send them an email saying, glad that you liked your claim, and can you fill in this survey, please? So I worked with a large cruise line company. And one of their key ones was people who were annoyed getting off the cruise and had a rubbish time, can we please not send them the really nice, glad you had a nice time email? Because oddly, that makes people doubly annoyed because you didn't even know. So how do I take that call center stuff, the fact that somebody phoned up and ranted, and then automatically block that email going out? How can I turn that call center, that anger, into data and better serve that person and better work out how I respond to them? Oh, hang on, have we gone to another animation here? I always have to worry with it. So in pieces, when we go in terms of what are people doing, the next challenge. What are people doing? How do people behave? So back to the Edward Snowden piece. Edward Snowden was, depending on how you believe the definitions, but I'm going to go for the one he was a sysadmin, rather than he appears to now be saying he was basically James Bond. But he was a sysadmin. He was allowed to access all of these boxes, all these machines. That was a job of a sysadmin. He was your IT support desk guy. Right? He did something that was slightly unusual for an IT support desk person working for the NSA. He downloaded all the content onto USB and walked out the building. Now, oddly for the NSA, an organization that does no-fly lists, that looks across all this massive external data to look for anomalous behavior, nobody thought, hang on, if we look at our log file data and look internally at the threat within, because if you've got a company today, be aware that we talk about cyber attacks, we talk about cybersecurity. The number one challenge remains people inside the firewall doing stuff you don't want them to do. Whether it's financial fraud, whether it's IP theft, the easiest way to do it is still to get somebody on the inside to do it for you than try and attack from the outside. Well, if you could have detected the fact, I've got a sysadmin who's just downloaded every single classified file that we've got and put it on a USB drive. He'd be sitting in Guantanamo Bay right now in a nice orange jumpsuit. And that's the point about anomaly. Whether it's fraud, whether it's pieces. I've got these huge pieces of data that tell me how people are working. I understand what they're doing. But I also understand how they're living. So Nest, if anybody's heard of Nest. Nest is an intelligent thermostat. Wow, if you think insurance is boring, how boring can that be?
It's exciting, honestly, I promise you.
A $3.2 billion value for an intelligent thermostat. Seriously? Why would anybody care? Okay, well, that intelligent thermostat links to your mobile phone. It knows when you're traveling home. It starts, I live on the west coast of the US, so we have air conditioning. It turns on the air conditioning on the way home so you save power. It turns off the air conditioning as you leave home because you don't need it. It understands how you are living your life and adapts your environment to it. Massive amount of data. Nest, a company that, although they've got a pretty little bit of design, fundamentally, all of that 3.2 billion comes down to the value of data.
So it's connected. So I talked about connected car, right? And I go on about that for ages. I love it. Connected home. So my wife goes mad at me because I have to try out all these gadgets for work. So she goes nuts at me, especially when I set up the connected thermostat thing to come on and go off when I leave the house, forgetting that she's at home with the kids, so she's freezing at home. I won't make that mistake twice. But the connected home is huge, right? So you look at some of the things out there today. Insurance companies for years have been talking about one of our most expensive, difficult claims, this is very personal to me at the moment, so I won't go into detail, is a water leak. Imagine this scenario. You go on holiday, you've got a burst pipe, you come back to the first floor being flooded. I'm not that bad, but it's not far off of it. That is one of the most expensive claims for an insurance organization. If you had a smart home and things were connected and you detected fire, smoke, carbon dioxide, and you could shut things down, your cost of claim goes down dramatically. Your cost of, or your value of your experience for your consumer goes up dramatically. You get a text to say someone's broken into your house. There's lots of smart alarms out there today that are more and more connected. You get an alert saying you've had a water leak. Did you know this? Please can you provide X, Y, Z access to the thing? We're sending a plumber. Wouldn't that be brilliant? The claim value for those things would go down dramatically and be a much better cost for the actual overall insurance company. So connected home is brilliant. Take it a step further. You are less likely to be burgled if you're in the house. You're more likely to be burgled if you're away. Common sense, right? What if your insurance policy and the money you pay tracked on a daily basis or hourly basis? Nigel's at home, premium goes down. Nigel's away, premium goes up. Same as my driving, right? It's just data. If I know where you are in location to your property and it's occupied, the risk of fire or leak or all those sorts of things goes down or up accordingly. It's just data. Are we using it?
And I think this is the piece in terms of when you look at the volumes and the pieces that's happening with the Silicon Valley startups, they are fundamentally disrupting these pieces. So a lot of this is, well, that sounds creepy, right? The amount of tracking that's going on, that's creepy. I was with the head of analytics at Facebook on an event recently, and he talks about the difference between creepy and delight. Well, they would, they're Facebook, right? They're hardly going to stand up and say we're creepy. But he talks about delight. Is if you show something where somebody goes, oh, you're right, that's an old school friend. Yeah, you're right, actually. You know, add friend. Then it's great. If I show you a piece of advert because I understand the way your network works, and I go, yeah, I'm interested, the same way Amazon does, people don't care. One of the great phrases somebody used on the same panel was, people give up a huge amount of privacy to be able to share a cat photo. Right? So it is creepy. You've got to be careful of the brand. You've got to think about these pieces, but be aware, if you're not, another company out there is doing what Amazon did. Another company out there is doing what Uber did. Another company out there is doing what Nest did, which is fundamentally disrupting those markets. And in terms of the data volumes, I'll give you some examples of things which are changing the way we work. Open data. Every single government out there, pretty much modern government, has demographic data they give freely and openly to down at the county, regional, and whatever level. Most companies are still paying for it. There's actually companies out there that still sell it. I worked with one organization who was buying from a company spending several $100,000 to get this information. I showed them data.gov, and they stopped paying several $100,000. So there was a company that lost a client to free, to government data. How many people are still paying for stuff that you don't need to pay for? What does that mean to your business? If you're looking at weather data and the volumes of why are people buying that? So some analytics we did with a retailer in the great cold north of the US. They found that cinnamon Pop-Tarts, which are a dreadful, dreadful food stuff, when the temperature drops below minus 20 centigrade, which seriously, for those of you who've never been to the great cold north of the US and Canada, you never ever. When it says minus 20, you've no idea how cold that actually feels. Cinnamon Pop-Tarts, 500% increase in sales of cinnamon Pop-Tarts. No other Pop-Tarts, just cinnamon. But if I didn't know about the weather thing, it just looks weird. If I know about the weather, I understand where it's going. Predictions and a volume. Understanding and mapping that data to an individual.
So a couple of examples, Steve, on that one. So weather data, I'm a crop insurer. Guess what? Weather data is super, super important to me. Of course it is. If I know what things are coming, I can predict it in advance. Google's in that space today. Google have better weather data than many that's out there today, mainly in the USA, because we don't do crop insurance very well or properly in the UK, in my view, compared to the States. But Google's there already. Will they ever become an insurer? No, that's a much different debate. The other one we talked about around point of sale and stuff was, there was a study in the States, in Australia, that talked about, get this, if you bought red wine at a petrol station late at night, you are more likely to crash your car. It doesn't take much data to do that calculation. Even I could do that. However, if you bought red meat, you were less likely to crash your car. Yes, if you bought red meat. I have no clue of the correlation, but the data proves it. So we can take your shopping habits and apply that to an industry like insurance. We can actually manage our risk in a very, very different way. It's the same for the Target story. Everyone's heard the Target story, where this guy gets a leaflet through to say his daughter's pregnant and whatever else. I think it was Target, and they said, here's what they've done, and here's your brochure for the things you can get for your baby. The guy calls up in sheer furious anger saying, my daughter's not pregnant, how do you know that? Turns out she is pregnant. The data, the shopping habits, her browsing habits online figured out that this girl was pregnant. So it turned out, so they went through the whole thing and they fixed it and they kissed and made up. What they did to fix that going forward, though, was to make it less suspicious to the parents. They now seeded sofas and lawnmowers in the brochures, so it wouldn't be so obvious to say your first baby. What a surprise to the parent, eh?
And I think, one of the pieces here in terms of the data and where it goes. So that's all, to be honest, a lot of the stuff we talked about now is data that's been available but just not executed on. Now sort of really talk out as where does this stuff go that it really begins to move? And you've got one on, I've got one on. Here's the wonder of the Fitbit. Anybody here got a Fitbit? A few people. This thing measures my heart rate 24/7, 365, tells me how I sleep, it tells me how I walk, and it tells me what my resting heart rate is. That's a huge change. The Apple Watch, slightly bigger, only a battery life of 18 hours, which is why I wouldn't personally go one. But here's suddenly something where I can start detecting with this volume of information. I can do things like predictive heart attack monitoring. So I can start seeing when somebody's going to have a heart attack and know before they know because of how their heart rhythm is changing. I can phone an ambulance in terms of in the future. To have an ambulance there as the person hits the ground. That shift of how I can change life expectancy is based purely on data. So when you look at reducing the costs in the NHS, reducing the cost to serve, and in terms of how you change health insurance, massive impacts based on lifestyle. Again,
maybe the Uber ambulances.
Uber ambulance. Yeah, I got hit by an Uber car in San Francisco, so I'm not sure. The quality in San Francisco, Uber's great, but the quality in San Francisco has gone really down in the last year or so. Sorry, personal bugbear. It's a real first world problem, right? Tell you what, Uber, not what it used to be. Well,
So you talk about a Fitbit. So again, insurance, right? This industry that I said is super exciting, super focused on data. If I told you today, Prudential Health, now called Vitality, will give you a discount if you are more active and more fit. Same for a company called Oscar in New York. They are starting to measure your activity to give you a lower premium on your insurance. It's there today. Imagine if you did that for the National Health Service. This is rudimentary. This is stage one. Stage two, we already talk about digestible sensors. Digestible sensors. These are things that are inside of us, telling us what's going on and being remotely monitored and elsewhere. The opportunity on health insurance here is gargantuan, just gargantuan. Our biggest cost in health insurance, last 2 years of your life. What's happening right now? We're all going to live longer, be healthier. Biggest cost, last 2 years. If we can shorten that cost for those last 2 years, there's a massive impact and opportunity for the health providers.
And I think also in terms of this pieces, so that's great in terms of new markets, but how does it change what I do today? If you're doing trading risk analysis, people who make dumb decisions, their stress level goes up. I know it sounds obvious. But what happens if I could find out the fact that that trader who'd made the bad decision was about to double down on stupid? Because he's made a bad decision, he's like, oh, I need to get out of it. Right, I need to make another bad decision, which hopefully will overwrite it. And then another one, and another one. Oh, that's $7 billion gone. Oops. And when did we find out? We found out a couple of days later, or we found out at the end of the day. If I can see a spike of stress, a spike of basically, uh-oh, something's gone wrong, I can actually start intervening to say, why don't we take I'm going to have somebody go over there, have a look, take a 5-minute break, because you're about to make a stupid decision. And fundamentally, that's how these things are going to change, not just these new models on the consumer side, but how we actually operate within businesses. What's the responsibility of a company to its employees if, I mean, Nigel does this with all the people in his team, all with Fitbit, is what's the responsibility of your team in terms of stress? What's your responsibility to your people in terms of keeping them healthy? What does that mean? Historically, it's been, well, we make sure a basket of fruit is available. Okay. Is that going to be enough? If you could have found out that somebody had high stress, and you could have been able to prevent a medical issue happening, do you become liable for that?
Massive, massive issue in our world. In insurance, you think about it, when do you shift from insurer to educator to being accountable for those decisions? If I know through the sensors, through your patterns, through your health, or whatever else, that you're about to have an issue that could be solved quite quickly through a procedure, otherwise, where does my responsibility lie to educate you to say, you need to have this issue resolved or it could be fatal? It's a massive shift in the business model.
And that sort of move towards, and when we start talking about also the smart machines in context. So how do I adapt with Nest? How does my environment adapt? My fridge, if anybody's seen the Amazon, the dash buttons now, you know, a button for every single product, and you just press the button and it'll reorder it. Well, you know, those will be automatically reordered. What does that mean? If I'm predicting the future, what does that actually mean in terms of all these analytics? If I've got smart machines, so I'm working a lot in the sort of aviation and heavy manufacturing industries. Every single part of an aeroplane is metered. Every single spin of the turbine is metered. That's a huge volume of data all the time that I can dynamically adapt. I can adapt the way a plane flies to the pilot who is flying it and the air conditions that exist to maximize the distance by fuel and minimize the stress on the aeroplane. I can actually change the car based on who is driving and the conditions for driving dynamically as it moves. So I can fundamentally shift the way your whole work environment moves, all automatically based on the data that I have for you.
Back to Tesla, sorry Steve, back to Tesla, right? So Tesla will now change the dynamics of the suspension on the car based on your driving pattern and the potholes it's been over, right? Now we have an issue with longevity of cars. Our cars will last longer. They're upgrading the software of the cars as they go. We've all seen Formula One. We've all seen them make 1,000+ changes to the car there and then during a race. That's coming into mainstream production now. Ford are doing it. Tesla started. It will be widestream. You park your car up, you plug it in, or whatever else you do with it these days, and it will update overnight. You get better fuel efficiency. You get longevity of car. You get better parts. You get a diagnostic while you're at home. You wake up and you go, today is your time for a service, or otherwise we've set you an Uber car to go and get you. It's just data.
And I think in terms of what this comes down to, though, so we've just talked about a huge volume of streams, and you know, social media is really the old school now, so we've all got to try and keep up. But at the heart of this is a challenge that most companies don't even start to solve, which is all of that virtual individual, all of this data, at the end of the day, comes down to a specific real-world person. It's a person. There's a certain number of people in this room. They are real people. We're all real people. Well, I know I am. I hope everybody else is too. But there's a challenge. If you can't uniquely identify those people, if you can't say who the real person is, you have two challenges. One is all these information sources mean nothing to you because you can't link them together to have any decent analytics. And the second one is, and this is if you're European, even scarier. The good thing in the US is right to be forgotten? No idea. And those things, if you're a Silicon Valley company, you don't understand any of that stuff. But in Europe, we have to worry about those pieces. We have to worry about things like right to be forgotten. And right to be forgotten is the individual's right to privacy. The individual's right to be forgotten. Well, if you can't identify that individual, all of these EU privacy legislation that's coming through, all of that is going to hit you. Deleting just what you think might be relevant to that person, if you've got another bunch of data around and it turns out, oops, I didn't delete that, oops, that was then used, you will be liable for that. So the risk in terms of compliance, the risk in terms of not knowing that individual. So at the heart of all of this data, it's great to have all these feeds, but if you can't identify the individual, you don't get any value out of this. That's what it all comes down to, is the segment of one. So in terms of are you ready for infinite individual? And in terms of, just to give you a scale of the volume, today's transactional data, if you think about it as a 250 ml cup, right, of water, that's what basically the terabyte or so of data you've got about a person. In terms of what's available in these volumes, think of Lake Mead. If anybody knows Lake Mead is what's behind the Hoover Dam. That's the sort of amount of data if you're monitoring every single heartbeat, every single location move, every single log file, every single interaction. All of that data is what will personalize this in the future and what will differentiate companies that survive from the ones who die because they were still just thinking an old way. In the way that Amazon, the way that Uber, the way that Airbnb is doing the hotel market, fundamentally changing based on data and information. So sort of three things here is, first one is, can you identify the real-world individual? Most companies can't even do that today. And if you can't do it on that cup of water, if you can't link that real-world individual on what you've got today, you have no chance of surviving. Can you handle the volume? That's where we talk about this lake. It's not just, this is your IT department's problem. This is not your old-style environment. Google and Facebook do not use a SQL database. They do not go and buy a box and just put it in. There are new technologies in this space. There are new approaches. There are new cost models around it. There are new mathematical modeling approaches. This is not your old-school IT environment. Can you handle the analytics? Do you understand what correlation and causation is? One of my favorite correlations is if you correlate chocolate consumption with Nobel Prize winners per capita, they are directly correlated. There is a great linear correlation. Now, before one of the anybody here has got connections with any of the parties over here goes, new education policy, force-feeding chocolate to kids, because we will get more Nobel Prize winners. That is clearly not causation. Understanding correlation via causation is one of the hardest things because it's very easy to find correlations, really easy to find correlations. Causation, much, much harder. And on the final point is, are you ready for what the implications of predictive maths is? If you genuinely have maths that is telling you what is going to happen, are you ready for what that means to your business? If you're talking about the ability to the fact that this is what will happen, this is a good chance of the future, not just how much have we got in stock today, but how much will I have in stock tomorrow? What are people going to buy in the next 3 months based on the weather predictions, how they're moving, what's done historically? How do I move my entire business to the fact that I'm no longer reacting, but I'm actually anticipating how the world is beginning to work? And within that, the piece on gender in the insurance industry is a fantastic example. We're not allowed to differentiate on gender. The data told us that, you can say this, women were a lower risk, to use the non-controversial definition, and therefore it was used as a differentiator. And the EU said, well, you can't do that because that's gender discrimination. Think about how your analytics could make it that you discriminate. So you want to increase your basket size, and you're to use an example, an organics company, and you really want to market all those pieces. And it turns out you've gone out and all this, and your 1,000 people have gone out to people who are all rich and white. Do you want that Daily Mail article? Do you want that Express article? And that's the challenge of predictive mathematics. It's not simply enough to say I'm moving towards a data world. It's what are the implications, and how will this analytics reflect my brand identity, and how do I use it to steer it to where I want to go? Huge volumes, down to that individual, but you've got to start changing the way we think about predictive analytics.
So if I can wrap up, Steve, it's fantastic. Yeah. I started off by saying insurance, 1648, Edward Lloyd, traditional industry. If we're starting to hire, rephrase that, we have started to hire as an industry data scientists. You know we have an issue when they're going, we need data scientists. It's no longer MI and 6,000 reports that we flip through. That's yesterday's world. It's done. It's gone. The drive like a girl example with the black boxes saying driving patterns, it's actually true. I'm going to run out of it really quickly afterwards. But men write cars off full stop. So if men crash, they're less often, but they're big. Women have much more frequent crashes, but they're much smaller. But we can no longer separate that rating factor between men and women. But with black boxes, it's just data. So you're able to do it based on fact and use those rating factors accordingly. So there are things that are going to disrupt our traditional world, like insurance. So you've heard connected car, connected home, connected health. All of a sudden, I have a real-time utility and dashboard that if I could buy over Amazon Prime, I don't need the middle guy. I don't need an insurance company. I don't care about you. So we either become really, really cool and relevant, or we become a capacity provider. So it's a really, really important turning point for insurance companies specifically, but many other organizations out there, as we start to leverage that data properly and understand what our relationship is going to be with those customers going forward. So with that, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
What do you want? Oh, Tom
Thank you
Jones.
very much, guys. That was great. So we have 5 minutes for a Q&A now, if anybody has a question for Steve or Nigel.
One at the back.
First, thanks very much. Massively interesting. Really nice way to kick the day off. Do you feel like there's perhaps a bit of a tension between, on this slide, the first point and the last point? Because I think the first point is sort of genealogical. It's about the stuff that tells us what a real person is, what our lived experience is or whatever. The second point is kind of pragmatic. It's forward-looking. It's about the opposite of that. It's about what we not are. I know that's kind of a woolly question, but...
No, I think that there is absolutely this tension because, back to the creepy problem, right, is you need to identify the individual, right, is how do you stop yourself being creepy, right, is how do you stop the fact that, using an example, it's a public example, NFL Mobile, 96% of people have allowed the NFL in the US to track their location through the NFL mobile app. Why on earth would you do that, right? But what does that mean? That means they know every single bar that you drink in when the game is on. They know who you support. That's 100% of people tell them who they support. And they know what bar you drink in. So with then iBeacons at the recent Super Bowl, they know exactly where you sat. They know exactly how you moved around, all of that data. So there's absolutely a tension between knowing the individual, having the mathematics, what it predicts, and then saying, hang on. Back to, if you get AI and Isaac Asimov's rules, is it really comes down to is, do I want to do that? Just because I know that thing, will it give me a positive outcome of actually my brand identity? It may be that I sell a bit more, but then when the Daily Mail headline comes out, is that going to massively impact me? And this is, I think, the real challenge between is understanding that individual is at the heart of everything. Because if you don't understand that individual, you have no control over the piece at the end. But the piece at the end is also about how you take brand control of your analytics so it doesn't lead you down to a place of, right, to the last 2 years of life. The logical piece, if the last 2 years of life are the most expensive thing, what's the logical analytics thing to do? Kill people 2 years before they're meant to die, right? You obviously don't want that. So what's the equivalent in your sector? Does that...
My favorite example is an insurance client that called me and said, I've got this great Hadoop stack. What do I do with it? I'm saying, why did you buy it? And they have no clue what the why question is. So unless you understand why you're doing it in the first place, you've really and truly got to separate out the business question to the technology question. Technology is easy, right? So almost everything is possible. I would say that. I work with Capgemini, right? I would say that. But it's genuinely, it's almost easy. You've got to work out the why. Why do we go onto a price comparison site for our car renewal or our house renewal, type in the numbers, we get our renewal letter, it's X £100. We go onto a price comparison site for the same brand and get a lower price. What's the first thing you do? You call them up and go, why is my price cheaper online? They then match it and you stay with the people. But you had a chance to interact with them. It's a business decision that they do that, not necessarily a technical decision. Could they link those things if you wanted to? Questionable, yes, depending on who you're speaking to. But you've got to separate those two things out.
One more question.
Oh.
One more question. Thank you.
Steve, you touched on the difference between the view in Silicon Valley as opposed to Europe,
Yep.
On where we're heading with these things. Do you have a sense whether those technology startups and the investors believe the world will cave in front of their glorious apps and technology, or whether they might have to move more towards the sort of social compact that we have in Europe, based on the fact we've got a 260 million marketplace they want a slice of?
Well, I think the answer is it's not as simple as that, because we've got China and places like that where they have different rules as well. So will those startups have to adapt to those areas? Absolutely. I think the piece in terms of the competition, though, is if we look at the internet age, the World Wide Web, right, is the fear. And we just did a survey at Capgemini, and if you're in Europe, you should be terrified by this, is about data and the ability to execute on data. Countries that actually are already executing and are seeing massive future value, the US and the BRICS. Place that's the biggest dragging the heels, Europe. So think about the World Wide Web, invented by Tim Berners-Lee in Switzerland, in Europe. Who made all the money? So I think they are adapting already. So the do not be forgotten, Facebook are already coping with those pieces. The pieces on Google, they're already coping with those ones. The challenge is, as European organizations, is we are massively behind. So in a world in which you say that Uber's a great example, Uber, 500 cars to 14,000 cars. This is a company that owns no assets.
12
right?
months.
What?
12 months. 500 last year, 14,000 this year.
14,000 this year. So the biggest taxi company in London. So I think the challenge is, yes, they will adapt without a shadow of a doubt, but in an insight-driven world, they're also going to eat everybody's lunch if we don't watch out. And fundamentally, the question is, how do you change the way we work in Europe? Although I get to live on the West Coast, but I still don't quite have the accent yet. That's the challenge. They will adapt. They're already doing it in terms of how do you deal with China? How do you deal with other countries around the world that have different laws? They're going to cope with those things. In Europe, we can't just say, well, we've got our social compact, so we're going to be safe. No, we're not. Look at Uber. Look what Uber's done to taxis. Think about what that means in your industry. They're coming. And it's heavily backed by VC money for a very simple reason. Why is Uber funded with $1.2 billion, I seem to recall, in cash? Because they'll be the glass for every single transport link, public-private transport link, in the world. That's their goal. Will they make that? Who knows? But that's a hell of a goal.
And guess what? City planners are using the data to work out how they design cities going forward. Look at the data streams that come out of the cars. It's fantastic. 2 years for the knowledge in London. I love a black cabbie, and I use them day in, day out. But 2 years for the knowledge, 20 minutes or whatever it takes for an Uber guy to get up and running, that's been disrupted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Good. Can we sit down now?
So thanks to Steve and thanks to Nigel, and also thanks to Capgemini, who are partners in today's event.